Breaking news, the victory of the Magyar in Hungary has crushed Putin and Trump. Old scenarios are crumbling before our eyes. Re-elections in Russia and an urgent presidential swap in the United States. An epic blow to the entire structure of influence. You must see this for yourselves. The Japanese spirit goes into battle. Samurai stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian armed forces. The alliance between Kyiv and Tokyo has done the impossible, a drone breakthrough that spans continents. And this is bad news for the Russian Federation. Europe is changing its tone. Great Britain has wiped the floor with the Kremlin at sea. London is starting a fierce cleanup of Putin's ships. Tensions in the ocean are rising by the minute. Russia has indeed lost the initiative where it least expected it. Putin and Kim Jong-un have clashed in a major standoff, and the resonance has spread worldwide. Is their showy friendship, which seemed unbreakable just yesterday, falling apart at the seams? All this and more in our episode Hellpoint. There's no point in hiding this anymore. While Putin threw all his weight into the Hungarian elections, he found himself cast aside. A coup in Moscow, the dictator's re-election, a total purge of power, and the end of the so-called SMO. The scenario they saved for dessert seems to be unfolding. Z-bloggers are finally starting to tell the truth. The Kremlin has abruptly lost control over its propaganda. The first results are already on the table. Has what everyone's been talking about for so long finally begun? Let's watch.
They've started to hate him, they've begun to despise him, and the electorate increasingly dislikes his policies.
And since I have such an incredible amount of free time now, honestly, I'm just going to hate everything in this country.
Even state structures admit that Vladimir Putin's rating is falling. According to VCIOM, the dictator's rating has dropped to 67%, the lowest level since February 20th, 2022.
A rating is an attribute of a democratic society, a democratic state. Russia clearly isn't one, especially in the context of the transformations it's undergone since 2022. Recent initiatives regarding information blocking and the persecution of any signs of discontent show that Russia's drift toward autocracy is continuing and deepening. Therefore, there's no rating if there's no competition. Putin has no competition because there are no free elections. And if someone even theoretically starts to claim a spot in these elections, they're either barred from running or something even worse happens.
But the fact remains, within Russia itself, we can hear dissatisfaction with the government more and more often. Moreover, it's not just among ordinary internet users who've been restricted, but also among bloggers and war correspondents.
It's not even that Russia can't win yet for objective reasons. The point is that Russia today, frankly speaking, doesn't have such a goal in a global sense. What do we need to keep in mind? There's no longer any rear, even within almost the entire country, and therefore completely different requirements must be established for the location of all command posts, infrastructure facilities, and the country's overall air defense system and the dispersal of material resources. Now, with modern air attack capabilities from both air and sea, practically the entire territory of the country is within range.
Criticism is being directed at both the Kremlin leadership and the army commanders. It's reaching the point where the war is seen as unnecessary and they no longer want to capture Kyiv. And as it turns out, the air defense isn't working properly.
Morons! By our morons, I don't mean everyone, I mean specific individuals. They're almost ready to send all the air defense there, like, let's just give it all away. They'll make a deal with the Americans now, and everything will be fine for them, you see? And then they'll ask, where is our air defense? They gave away all their air defense, and so on, you understand?
But why have they started speaking out so openly with such dissatisfaction? As experts say, this is just a drop in the ocean? And that's why, for now, we shouldn't take this widespread discontent too seriously.
Well, first of all, military correspondents were a privileged class for a long time, a class of Russian propagandists, maybe not at the highest level like Solovyov or Kiselyov, but still quite privileged. Well, basically no one really provided for them, but they were allowed, let's say, to profit from military-related topics through fundraising and through advertising on social media. Now, all those sources of income have been taken away from them. So, in effect, they're being told, guys, you're not really needed anymore. A quiet grumbling is starting, which hasn't turned into anything more serious yet because they're afraid of following Gherkin and other similar figures. In
the social media groups of Russian leaders, we can increasingly see calls for protests, calls to overthrow the government or to stop the war. But if you, heaven forbid, thought the protests are real in this country, then dismiss those thoughts.
At this stage, it's unlikely. But we must understand that in Russia, essentially, protests never really happen. Protest is just not a Russian thing. In Russia, it's either a spontaneous riot or a coup at the top. And a coup is more common than a spontaneous riot. So it's either something completely unpredictable that can start literally anywhere and escalate into total looting and riots, or the elites will decide that it's easier without Putin than with him, and they'll decide to quietly remove him, as has happened in Russia many times before. So basically no one is expecting any protests.
No protests, no changes in government. It's definitely not worth feeding on illusions. But it's worth noting that changes in society are still happening. But when the critical thinking of these people will reach a peak for some real action is still unclear. So for now, we're only seeing the dictator's low rating and a whole lot of nothing from the electorate.
Urgent Trump has disgraced himself before the whole world. It's time to send the old man to a nursing home. Even his own people have gone on the attack. MAGA bloggers have harshly criticized the US president, and now without any pleasantries. A scandal that could be the beginning of the end. The rhetoric has changed dramatically. Instead of support, it's an outright dismissal into the political archives. Has Trump gone mad? After all, isn't the end of the Americans' era approaching faster than he himself expects? You will be shocked by such forecasts.
Donald Trump's ego buried Trumpism and split the MAGA movement. Congressional elections are just around the corner, and the US president has alienated millions of supporters.
If you could say something to Donald Trump, what would you say?
You're a pathetic piece of shh.
And how many times did you vote for him?
3 times. It's my own fault, probably. I guess I'm an idiot.
It's just one step from love to hate, and now Trump's harshest critics are yesterday's Trumpists and MAGA movement followers. The president's advocates aren't holding back, attacking the biggest opinion leaders in the Republican circle with a combined audience of over 40 million.
I know why Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones have been speaking out against me for years, because they have one thing in common: a low IQ. They lost their shows, and they're not even invited on TV anymore because nobody is interested in them. They're crazy, troublemakers, and they'll say anything for free and cheap publicity.
The spark that ignited the flame in the Republican ranks was the war in Iran. Trumpists cheered the brilliant US operation in Venezuela and tried to ignore the Epstein files, but isolationists and right-wingers among MAGA sharply condemned the new war in the Middle East.
Why can't this president or any other say no to Israel? Essentially, our country is undermined by Israel's actions, and it seems we can't do anything about it. Every American has the right to know why such a small country has such influence over our government.
Regarding their former idol, Trumpists are using the same playbooks that were used against his predecessor. MAGA similarly claimed that Biden was under external control. They accused Joey of mental deficiencies.
And that's why he'll have 5-6 times a day, "Oh, we won, it's over. No, it's going to go on forever, total destruction. I'll never let them have the Strait. Yes, we're giving up the Strait. I'm getting out of NATO. We're staying in NATO." And when you actually know people who are in the early stages of dementia, that is exactly what they really do.
Essentially, the president is now being attacked by his own Frankenstein's monster. Democrats are sitting on the riverbank watching Trumpists accuse Trump of old age and incapacity.
It's time to send Grandpa to a nursing home, where he can be properly cared for.
Isolationists have dubbed Trump a slave to Israel. Propagandists have seized on the age issue, and conspiracy theorists are manipulating the topic of mental health. The creation is at war with its own creator.
Everyone in his administration who calls themselves a Christian should get on their knees and pray to God for forgiveness and stop worshipping the president instead of stopping Trump's madness. He's gone crazy, and all of you have become his accomplices. This isn't Make America Great Again. This is evil.
Russia was not prepared for this. A Japanese fist of power has struck right at Moscow. A new alliance between Kyiv and Tokyo has just signed Putin's death warrant. Behind the scenes, they're calling it a drone revolution that will bring Moscow's end closer. Putin's closest allies don't know how to tell the dictator the samurai are entering the front on the side of the UAF. Zelensky and Takaichi shake hands. They've finally done what everyone has been whispering about. Don't miss the first details.
Russia has officially protested to Japan and summoned the Japanese ambassador to Moscow. The reason was the new cooperation between Tokyo and Kyiv in the field of drone technology. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs accused Japan of hostile actions in supporting Ukraine in the war. This refers to an agreement between the Japanese company Terra Drone and the Ukrainian manufacturer Amazing Drones, which became known back in March. The Japanese side is investing in a Ukrainian company that specializes in the development of interceptor drones. The main task is to combat reconnaissance and strike drones, including the drones mass deployed by Russia, such as the Iranian Shaheds. Shooting down missiles with missiles might be okay, but shooting down a Shahed that costs $30,000 with a missile that costs over $500,000 is economically irrational, and it's no longer acceptable. And people are starting to understand this. Therefore, the demand is extremely high. At the same time, Japan's participation in such a project is of particular importance. Since World War II, the country has followed a pacifist policy and for a long time avoided participating in wars abroad. However, since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the land of the rising sun has been gradually reviewing its role. Japan has already provided Ukraine with billions of dollars in aid, from humanitarian support to the restoration of infrastructure and energy. Japan considers the occupied territories to be occupied, and it refuses to sign a peace treaty with Russia because they want Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands returned. Therefore, it can logically help any country in the world that is at war with Russia help with anything and launch missiles itself however it wants. In addition, Tokyo has joined the sanctions against Russia and has repeatedly declared its support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. Now, cooperation is reaching a technological level, albeit through private companies. At the same time, Tokyo's political position remains consistent. In February 2026, the head of Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed the country remains on Ukraine's side, and this position is unchanging, which Russia obviously does not support.
Well, they threw a tantrum this morning at Japan because Japan invested a bit of intellect and money into the production of Ukrainian drones. A little bit, just a tiny bit, they're interested, maybe even more for themselves, but they helped us a little. There's total hysteria here that Japan, almost like samurai, is participating in the war on Ukraine's side.
Earlier in January 2024, Japan's Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa visited Kyiv on an official visit where she declared readiness to strengthen support and participate in international security initiatives, including nuclear safety issues. In Moscow, this is perceived as another step toward deepening Japan's involvement in the war. Also, obviously, there is panic in Russia over the cooperation between Ukraine and Japan in the field of drones. They called it a threat to their own security. And Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova characterized this partnership as an openly hostile step. The Kremlin cynically stated that Ukrainian drone developments are supposedly legitimate military targets.
Great Britain has begun a fierce cleanup of the sea, a special operation from Starmer that the world applauds. London has cut off the air to Moscow and announced Putin's failure. Russian ships have been anchored. The Kremlin's bloody scenario failed to come to life. The Atlantic Bastion program is at the start. British troops are being put on full combat alert. The warnings have ended. This is all for Ukraine's sake. You will be shocked. Don't miss the most important part. Britain has exposed a secret Kremlin operation.
To President Putin, I say, we see you.
Russia was conducting a secret operation involving submarines in British waters.
Healy replied to the Kremlin and Putin, we will not take our eyes off them. Putin would like us to be distracted by the Middle East. But Russia is the main threat to Great Britain and its allies.
The UK armed forces monitored 3 Russian submarines in the North Atlantic around the clock for over a month. This is no longer a routine patrol, it's an attempt to find the West's vulnerabilities.
The defense minister exposed and brought into the public sphere a Russian operation that neither side had commented on before. A kind of underwater standoff is happening between the two countries, which usually remains out of the public eye. It's interesting that he's raising this issue for a number of reasons. He calls it, as I see it, a show of strength in terms of British and Allied capabilities. The Royal Navy worked with the Norwegians using Royal Air Force reconnaissance planes to track 3 submarines.
As Defense Minister John Healey said, this group included a Project 971 nuclear submarine, which is also known as the Shchuka B class, and 2 specialized Googie boats, which are operated by the main Directorate of Deep Sea Research. The Shchuka B could have played the role of a decoy, intentionally drawing attention to itself, and meanwhile the submarines were working directly over critical infrastructure.
The Akula-class attack submarine and 2 Googie reconnaissance submarines departed from British waters and began making their way back north. This happened after these intelligence vessels had spent some time over critical undersea infrastructure, facilities that are of concern to us and our allies.
The Russian Federation's underwater operation in the Atlantic has failed miserably. The British Navy chased away Russian submarines that were engaged in espionage.
In such a case, the British side may respond with similar actions.
Healy did not disclose exactly what the Russian submarines were trying to do, but from the defense secretary's words, it's clear the operation's goal was underwater communications.
There is no evidence that any damage was caused.
A significant portion of the gas used to heat Great Britain flows through these underwater pipelines.
Our armed forces are among the best in the world, and the British public should have no doubt that this government will do whatever is necessary to protect our national and economic security, wherever in the world it may be required.
Along the coastline of Great Britain, especially in East Anglia and the southwest of the country, there are about 60 undersea cables that come ashore at several points. Up to 99% of international internet and telecom traffic, which underpins global banking, trade, and communications, passes through them.
We will not shy away from taking action and exposing Russia's destabilizing activities, which aim to test our resolve.
The struggle has long since moved beyond land and air. Russia wants to undermine the stability of other countries.
Great Britain is significantly increasing its defense efforts, with the government spending an additional £100 million on submarine hunting aircraft and launching the Atlantic Bastion program to create new British hybrid naval forces.
Addressing Putin directly, Healy said the following.
We see you. We see your activity over our cables and pipelines, and you should know that any attempt to damage them will not be tolerated and will have serious consequences.
According to the Russian embassy in London, the Russian propaganda agency TASS denied Healy's claims. The British government pointed out that this is not the first such activity by the Kremlin. Last year, the intelligence vessel Yantar was spotted near British waters. And over the last 2 years, the number of Russian ships posing a threat to British waters has increased.
The Yantar is one of the key vessels used by Russia to threaten Great Britain and our allies. Over the last 2 years, the number of Russian vessels threatening British waters has increased by 30%.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha responded to the recent counter-operation carried out by Great Britain, offering his perspective on the situation.
We highly value the vigilance and resolve of our British partners. Exposing Russia's malicious actions is one of the most effective methods of countering them. We urge the international community to abandon any illusions about Moscow. This regime must be contained, isolated, and subjected to relentless sanctions to curb its aggressive ambitions.
This year, the United Kingdom has significantly increased its water patrols to deter Russian aggression and provide enhanced protection for critical undersea infrastructure. The UK continues to monitor the situation very closely, working in close cooperation with its allies to carefully track and prevent any activity that could possibly threaten British interests.
A major failure on a global scale that has shaken even the Kremlin's inner circle. Putin and Kim Jong-un have entered a fierce confrontation, and the fallout is already spreading worldwide. Is their showy alliance finally cracking? The door slammed shut on Moscow, leaving no chance to turn the situation around. The grand plan to turn North Korea into a tourist showcase for Russians collapsed before our eyes. The propaganda image is crumbling, and facts that they tried to keep under lock and key for so long are leaking out. Where did it go wrong? Who outplayed whom? Next, what they tried to keep behind the scenes, don't miss it.
Planes are flying, but there are no passengers. Direct flights from Moscow to Pyongyang, which were launched back in the year 2025 as what was essentially a near-ideological tourism project, ultimately turned out to be just for show rather than serving any real practical purpose.
Russians were the first foreigners allowed into the new resort in 2025. The first tour took place in mid-July and apparently was not very well attended.
For 2 days, we were absolutely the only ones there. Then the locals arrived. And of course, it was very strange when the entire resort is operating for 13 to 15 people.
Only 9 flights in 6 months. And as sources close to the airline admit, there are virtually no tourists on board. To a follow-up question about the load, there was an almost anecdotal answer: sometimes seats are occupied.
A journalist from Kommersant, part of Lavrov's pool, had a similar impression. She describes deserted streets and presumably fake North Korean tourists.
The plus here is that there are no tourists. I mean, for example, you go to Thailand and all of Moscow is there, so to speak.
At the same time, formally there is a flow to North Korea, almost 10,000 trips in 2025. But if you look closer, the picture becomes less impressive. About 1,000 business visits. Another 5,000 or so are tourists, but mostly organized groups who are flown not via Moscow, but via Vladivostok on North Korean airline flights. And almost this entire flow is controlled by a single tour operator. In other words, the direct bridge from Moscow, which was the main bet, turned out to be simply unnecessary. Although expectations were completely different. the Russian authorities promoted North Korea as an alternative to closed Western destinations. The opening of air service was called a landmark event with assurances that the flow of tourists would only grow. They even opened a new resort for this, Wonsan Kalma, which is specifically aimed at Russians.
You know, I honestly still can't believe that I'm staying at a luxury beach resort in North Korea right now. Can you even imagine that? This is the very Wonsan Kalma resort that Kim Jong-un personally opened. Over there, Koreans are shouting, and where it's empty, those are foreigners. This boatman here is watching us. I'm afraid he might blow his whistle.
But there was no enthusiasm. 5,000 tourists a year is a figure that contrasts sharply with the nearly 7 million Russians who chose, for example, Turkey. The reasons aren't just the exotic nature of the destination. A trip to the DPRK is a strictly organized tour with no right to independent movement. Tourists are accompanied by guides. The program is scheduled in advance. You cannot deviate from it. In fact, it's not a vacation, but a carefully controlled route. And given all this, the idea of spending a vacation in such conditions didn't inspire everyone.
Sometimes it's annoying that the guides and Comrade Major are constantly whispering. I always suspect it's because of me. They have some kind of paranoia.
A rare case when you can simply stand against the backdrop of a cityscape in North Korea. Usually everyone is watching me, following me.
However, the project is not being shut down. In 2025, the state allocated over 120 million rubles for air travel, of which tens of millions went to the airline operator. And even with almost zero load, they are ready to continue flights if there is a state need. As a result, a paradox emerges. There's a destination, there are planes, there's money, but there's no demand.
Oh, did you hear that? Guys, we caught the sound. I don't know what it is, a rocket launch or something else. Rumor has it there's a missile range nearby, but the guides say nothing. Silent as partisans. Well, it looks like what I feared happened. As soon as we got a few meters closer to the Korean beach, slowly, they started driving the children away. Look, this man is driving the children away so we don't encounter them.
It seems Russians didn't appreciate the initiative and preferred more familiar vacation options instead of an exotic route from one isolation to another.
That's all from me. I was with you, Darina Gutskalo. More hellish news in our next episode. Well, for now, don't forget to subscribe and like. See you.